So next up we have Gareth from the University of Surrey. This presentation has been the subject of many a tweet over the past few weeks, so I'm personally quite intrigued. But Gareth's going to be talking about his experiment and how the challenges around getting things done in the university and how they used an idea management system to help staff to work together and deliver better services. So I'm going to hand you over to Gareth.
Sally's lying, really. What this actually is a ploy to get me not tweeting for 40 minutes because she wants the prize for Best Tweeter. After the great session this morning with Carolyn, I've been racking my brain to think of a way to lower expectations for this presentation because there has been a bit of a buzz on Twitter about it. So my name's Gareth Edwards, and over the next 100 slides I'm going to be talking to you about innovation and our experiences at the University of Surrey doing an idea management program. Two things to point out as we go. First up, I'll be picking out some key lessons, the things that we learned as we were going through the exercise. But also in orange, in the bottom left-hand corner of some of the slides, I'll be giving you homework, some further reading on topics around innovation and idea management. Don't worry too much about taking notes. It'll all get tweeted out. It'll be on the conference webpage after the conference as well. Now, when I started to put this presentation together, I spent a lot of time trying to think what held it all together. What is the vital bit of the story that ties the presentation together? But the more I thought about it, the more I found myself wondering, what do we even mean by innovation? What does innovation mean to us? Now, a lot's made of innovation in the corporate world with the idea of getting products to market before your competitors. But that kind of thinking didn't really feel like it applied to us. And while I've said for a long time that we should be making more of our IT resources when it comes to things like student recruitment, students obviously don't look at a university's IT department and then go, I'm going to that university. Our business systems tend to be big, expensive, year-long upgrade cycles, very little room for new thinking. So does innovation actually have a role in higher education IT at all? Now, I decided it had to. Otherwise, the only alternative for today would be 40 minutes of quiet time. But of course, innovation plays a role in higher education regardless, because university research is all about innovation, directly and indirectly. And while the stereotype of the bearded professor stood in front of a blackboard persists somewhat accurately, we've all seen and supported quite dramatic changes to how teaching is delivered in the universities and colleges, with the likes of online plagiarism detection and lecture capture. But why is innovation important to us as IT departments? I mean, aren't we all slow, inward-facing? We're more interested in maintaining the status quo than doing anything new. But we tend to do it because we have to, and it tends to be in response to external drivers. And it's solving problems with new ideas, although I'm not entirely sure what problem this idea is meant to solve. So we do it in response to external drivers. Changing technologies is an obvious one, to say nothing of student expectations. This is what £9,000 looks like in 50s. That was a fun half an hour with paint. To say nothing of the challenges associated with the changing model for funding in higher education. But in addition to being forced, this shouldn't just be something that we feel forced into doing. This should be something that we all want to be doing on some level, taking advantages of the latest technology, benefiting from a new way of working, looking to the next thing. And it's the kind of thing that we see in high-performing employees and teams, and it's the kind of thing that we should be encouraging. And what about idea management? Well, Gartner defines idea management as being a structured process of generating, capturing, discussing and improving, organising, evaluating and prioritising valuable insight or alternative thinking that otherwise not have emerged through normal processes. Which is about right, but you know that Gartner wrote that. Ideas are powerful things, and they can be quite valuable things. In 1947, there was a British toy company called Kiddicraft who started selling what they called self-locking building bricks. And they showed off 6-foot tall skyscrapers made of the bricks in the Earls Court toy show that same year. Now, shortly afterwards, a London-based manufacturer sold a plastic mould injection machine to a Dutch man named Ole Kurt Christensen. And to demonstrate the powers of this new machine they'd given them, they sent along, among other things, drawings and samples of Kiddicraft's blocks. Now, shortly afterwards, Christensen started selling very similar blocks with minor modifications called automatic binding bricks. Now, Christensen's company eventually bought Kiddicraft in 1981, ironically to protect other companies using their bricks design. Now, of course, Christensen's company is Lego. In 2012 alone, they made 45.7 billion bricks, which is comfortably over the 40 billion that apparently you'd need to build a column to the moon. So, to sum up, innovation is important, ideas are valuable, and idea management was a way of maximising the values of those ideas, unlike this.
If you really feel the need to discuss it, just write it down on a piece of paper and slip it in my suggestion box.
Really?
Yeah. Ted, show it to her. Sorry.
Okay.
If you're familiar with Scrubs, you know that in a later series, Dr. Kelso, the old guy there, has a suggestion box outside his office that feeds through a tray directly into a shredder. He's not a fan of new ideas. So, to come back to my original dilemma, would mine be a tale of technology or would it be process? I'm stood in front of a room full of support professionals and we all love a bit of process. Is it money that's at the core of the story or is it communication? And in the end I realised that these bits all have something to play in the story, but fundamentally this is a story about people and occasionally very important people. And it's a story that starts with these two people in particular. Now these are Alex and Chris. And depending on who you ask, they're described as being smart, dedicated, disruptive, challenging, and really, really annoying. And in theory, at least, they work for me, although it usually feels the other way around. Now, these aren't the very important people that I've talked about, but they are important to the story, because it's all their fault. And to understand how they managed to cause all this trouble, we need to take a quick look at how IT is organised at the University of Surrey. Now, back in 2007, the university restructured and introduced academic IT teams in each of the new faculties, with a working relationship to IT services, a central team who look after the campus-wide services, business systems, that kind of thing. Now, during the early years, these groups all had a very uneasy coexistence, which is probably a story that sounds familiar for those of you with federated IT setups. What finally managed to break these cultural barriers down was a series of campus-wide projects introducing things like virtual software delivery and workstation management. For the first time, we were delivering projects from academic and central IT resources, and no one was getting stabbed, I'm pleased to confirm. At around the same time, I'd given Alex and Chris a brief similar to Google's 20% policy. As long as the day job was in hand, they had the freedom to explore and develop sort of little things that would make our lives easier in IT, or would make our user experience of IT better. And they were to seek out like-minded people elsewhere in IT to collaborate with. Now, we ran this exercise for a couple of months, and we came up with a few nice services. We had a printing app which allowed users to add and remove network printers from across campus through a simple interface. To my shame, we still use quite a lot of Word and PDF forms that you have to fill out, print to fill out, post off to get anything done. And we checked, and it definitely is the 21st century. So we put together a simple way of creating forms online for users to fill out. Our biggest success is probably the Surrey's Computer Lab Availability System, which pulls information about computer availability from Windows, Mac, Linux labs and puts it all out through a nice responsive web interface. These are all called minor innovations, and we referred to the exercise as a Minor Innovations Bureau. We didn't change the world, but we did come up with some nice things that led to incremental improvements in the user experience. And we learnt a lot about taking little ideas and developing them, and we learnt a lot about the power of iterative development and prototyping. But this success at a team level didn't scale up into the campus projects. Tasks that took Chris and Alex just 10 minutes to do in the office could take weeks to do when they're using resources from elsewhere in the university. This wasn't due to a lack of competence, it just tended to be because this was how things were done. Now, Chris and Alex struggled against what they saw as being quite unreasonable constraints. On more than one occasion they came up with what you might call creative workarounds, something that on occasion I may have encouraged them to do. But it's at this point we introduce a new person to our story. So this is my boss, Roger Stickland, the IT director, who didn't know his photograph was appearing today. just occurred to me. I took these concerns to Roger, who offered to meet with Chris and Alex to talk about their experiences. The heart of their report was that it was difficult to get new things done. Innovation was being stifled by a reluctance to move beyond insular, old-fashioned ways of working. Now, in response to what Roger later described as a forthright exchange of views on how we can improve innovation and be better at communicating, Roger asked Chris to take a lead on developing an ideas board, some way of capturing little ideas that might make a big difference. Now, as we talked about it, we felt quite clear that it wouldn't be enough to just put the equivalent of the online equivalent of an old-fashioned suggestion box up on the wall and hope for the best. We would have to do something a bit more than that. So we came up with what we started calling the Surrey 4-step. So it's time for a dance lesson. No one needs to stand up, that's disappointing. You're all fine, you don't need to stand up. Step 1's about process. Now, we knew we were working with ideas that would be deposited in some way by staff, and other than wanting to discuss them and vote on them, we weren't really sure where we wanted people to go with them next. Now, this is the process that some of you may recognise from the CISA conference in Brighton earlier this year. Let's take a closer look at it. It all starts with someone submitting an idea, and from there people can discuss the idea and vote for the things that they like. And from that point, there are a couple of things that can happen. If the right combination of people are interested, we might move straight into delivery. We might run a proof of concept exercise, get some volunteers together to have a look at it, find some old equipment that we can put towards it, seed funding, that kind of thing. Not everything's going to work out, and that's absolutely fine. We've planned for that. And we'll talk about a bit more about failure in a moment. Sometimes an idea does have legs, it does work, but it's such a big thing that we can't just do it in a little piece of work, so we spin it off into our project management process. And either through a project or through a quick win or just off the back of a proof of concept or pilot, we consider the idea to be realised. This brings us to our first lesson, and that's about process. We did quite well having a process. It's important to communicate it and use it consistently. In step 2, we looked at platform. I'm not going to talk too much about the technology side of this. It's not really the important side of the story. Although we did have a lot of fun looking at the various options that are out there on the market and playing around with them. Now, we settled on a hosted product called IdeaScale because it fit our requirements in terms of integration with other services, budget, but most importantly, it would support our process. And lesson 2 is about platform. It's not a big part of the exercise. Don't sweat platform selection. Look for something that fits in terms of process and budget. It's not really rocket science. Now, step 3, and our story goes back to people. Having been willing to get a photograph of our IT director and put it up without telling him. Apparently, why am I showing you a room, an empty meeting room? Standing up and talking to you all is terrifying, but it's absolutely nothing compared to asking my management peers if I can take their photograph. So I'm afraid you get the room that we meet in most often. And we're still not on to our very important people that I promised earlier. Now, before we launched our idea management platform, I met with them with the aim of getting with 2 objectives in mind. Firstly, I wanted them to allow and encourage their staff to be involved. We were always confident that self-starters, motivated people, they would dive in, that'd be fine. We wanted to make sure there were no management barriers to participation. We were asking for their staff to submit ideas, be part of the debate, but also to possibly be doing work that's outside of their normal roles. So we wanted management support for that. But really, I also wanted their commitment to the overall concept. We knew we had Roger's support, we had links into the project management framework, the potential seed funding, those kinds of things. But the ideas generated would impact on the systems and processes that the management team are responsible for. So we needed them all to enter the process with an open mind. We knew that there needed to be a complete commitment to making successful ideas a reality, and for this not just to be a talking shop when nothing happens as a result. The lesson here is about the promise. Make it mean something. Get commitment from your leaders and managers. It's time as well as money. Without this, there's no point. Which brings us on to the final part of the Surrey 4-step. And at last, we meet our very important people. This is the rest of the Surrey IT department. And step 4 is all about getting their participation. We could have a watertight process, a cutting-edge innovation tool, and management commitment coming out of our ears. But if we don't sell it to these guys and get them involved, it's all been a waste of time. Now, we launched with a presentation to the whole department at one of the regular departmental briefings. Chris and I took to the stage. We talked about innovation, we talked about idea management, the process, idea scale and the management commitment. And we followed up the presentation with an email with all the links and information that people needed to get started. The lesson here really is all about participation. This is the bit where you start to realise value. You've got to explain what you're doing, sell it to them. Why is it good for them as individuals? Why is it good for the organisation as a whole? And get them involved. Now, there's one of Chris's slides from the original briefing that I want to share with you. It's about failure. Failure is okay. We acknowledge this from the start. Not every idea is going to work out. So here's what Chris said.
Not all the ideas are going to work out. We will find ideas that no one has the skills, time, funds or even interest to take through to fruition. We will find the ideas that after a bit of tinkering just end up getting shelved. Some things are impossible. Some just aren't going to work. And some we probably can't afford to produce. We need to remember that this is okay. The knowledge we gain by just trying something has an intrinsic value. An idea sat unwanted on the shelf may inspire another idea. An idea not becoming reality is not necessarily a bad thing.
So having lit the blue touch paper, what happened? We found that early adopters played a very big role in it. The first 10 ideas came from just 5 of the 35 people who signed into the site by the end of the first week. And there's a lesson there really around early adopters. Cultivate them. Ideally have them lined up from the start. They'll give you that little boost at the start where the people who come in slightly later will go, oh, there's stuff happening here, this is really good. What were some of the early highlights? Well, here's a word cloud of the first 10 ideas. It was great first up to be able to see words like people and student featuring so prominently in the early days. Among the highlights of the early ideas was establishing a service to help staff migrate data off old media. We made the Open Dyslexic font available on all computers, which was a big hit with the library, and easily the most popular idea that came up, and I think we would have done it years ago if we could afford it, was to make there's a lake on campus with a lovely green area with trees around it, make wireless available around the lake. I think we would have done it years ago if we'd been able to afford it. So we were really pleased with how it all started, but we knew we'd have to keep up the tempo, to keep people aware of what's going on, keep them informed, keep them engaged, keep them interested. We also knew that gathering ideas wasn't enough. We wanted to start turning these ideas into actual things, start delivering the ideas. Because that's the point of the exercise, that's the point we start realising the exercise. So Chris and I started meeting fortnightly. We'd review what everyone's been up to, see what we could do to encourage further debate, get more ideas, see if we could find volunteers and put them next to ideas to start moving things along, see what we could do to deliver ideas ourselves. We put together occasional emails that went out to the department to cover new ideas, hot topics, recent successes, that kind of thing. It became quite clear early on that we needed to have a facilitator for this. Partly someone there to answer process questions, but also there to help ideas develop, help them grow and get to the point where we can actually start doing something with them, generally keep things moving along. That was a lot of effort, but there was a clear link between when we were active behind the scenes and when the community was active. And nowhere is clearer than the first week in November of last year, when I was away from work unexpectedly for a fortnight. Chris had to deputise for me in the team, so we had no communication, no progress, and that led to no ideas, no comments, no votes. So another lesson, tempo is important. Communication, facilitation, but ultimately delivery of the things that keep people engaged and keep them contributing. And just to bring the last couple of lessons together, it's important to point out this is an investment, and possibly more of people's time than it is necessarily money. And any investment comes with a risk. It's really important before starting this kind of thing that that's understood. So we kept up what we could with the regular emails, the interventions. We went back to the next departmental briefing to update the department on what had been going on and to introduce Nemo. We had a couple of surprises along the way. I didn't think that slide would get a laugh. The most actively and occasionally ferociously debated idea that anyone submitted was about our ITSM tool, specifically binning it and adopting, they're not here today, it's okay. Specifically binning it and adopting the free system Spiceworks. We saw some very strongly held views expressed, along with something that we hadn't really anticipated, tactical voting. This is where the votes came from for this idea. I'll leave it to you to guess where the idea originated. Obviously, this kind of thing isn't something we can deliver. We all know these are investments in time and money. It's not something that we can deliver off the back of this exercise. But despite this, we still eventually moved the idea into delivery, and now we've marked it as complete, now that the university is starting a project to introduce a new ITSM tool. Now, how were we able to take something we could never do and claim success from it? It's because from the point that it became a hot topic, and it became a very hot topic, every senior management discussion about ITSM tools included a reference to Spiceworks. So what started off as a fairly snarky idea still influenced the debate, even though it wasn't really practical. And the lesson we took from that was that the journey has value, even if sometimes the journey is a challenging one. So things didn't always go swimmingly. I mentioned where we failed to keep up tempo and the activity dropped. We had a few contentious ideas pop up, not only around Spiceworks, but also around the idea scale site itself. When I emphasised process, it's because we didn't get that quite right, and this came back to bite us. Another one that came up, there's a question of whether or not to allow downvoting. There were views both ways. We chose to maintain a positive view. You voted for something you liked, you didn't downvote something you didn't like. But your experience and mileage may vary. And there were some ideas that were just too big to realise. I mentioned the wireless by the lake. We had a great idea about using many of the flat roofs we have on campus for solar panels. A great idea, but too big for the scope of the programme we were running. We also didn't quite carry the management support to the degree that we first thought. And this manifested itself as a struggle to maintain commitment to ideas that we'd already said we could move into delivery. Now, before I start to wrap up our experiences, I should make reference to gamification, but I know that Brian Smith will be talking more about this tomorrow. Arguably, the root of our experiment with idea management goes further back than I suggested, all the way back, in fact, to Liverpool of last year and the UCISA conference there, where David Cottrell, who at the time was the head of innovation for the Department of Work and Pensions, gave a very good presentation about idea management, gamification, and a project the DWP ran called Idea Street. Now, gamification was a big aspect of that project and key to its success. Idea Scale has gamification features built in, including badges and a point system, but we chose not to make a big deal out of them. That said, we did want to do something to acknowledge successes and the notable contributions that people have made. So we gave out some awards. These went to the most prolific commenter to acknowledge the contribution to the overall debate, to the person who submitted the idea which prompted the most number of comments, the Spiceworks idea, and the person who accumulated the most points through submitting the most comments, votes and ideas, our most valuable player. The lesson we took from that, as we should do everywhere else in our organisation, is acknowledge the successes and notable contributions. So overall, what did we get from this? We saw some great ideas. While there was nothing that really changed the world, we managed some incremental improvements to the user experience of IT. Collectively, we highlighted a few shared bugbears. Communication around major incidents was one of the first ones that came up. How do we share the lessons learned from projects? And even how we deal with things like password management were all things that we previously considered complaint over coffee issues that wouldn't get very far without management support. And to see these kinds of things being addressed off the back of frontline staff suggestions was really good. We highlighted a few problems with communication across the department as well. On more than one occasion, an idea popped up from one area of IT, only to discover that a different part of the department was already doing it. And the lesson we took from this is not to be surprised with unexpected outcomes. All the value doesn't necessarily come from realising the ideas themselves. The biggest positive thing I think we've seen, and probably the most unexpected, has actually been around staff engagement. We had over 80% of the department got involved. Excuse me. 80% of the department got involved, and over time we saw a greater involvement with the academic IT staff than we'd seen previously. And the great thing was that this carried on into the real world. Primarily we saw this through departmental briefings, where we saw progressively greater attendance from groups in IT who would not normally associate with the other teams in IT. The lesson we took from this was its benefits of engagement and a strong sense of community online will be reflected offline. So despite all this great stuff and some brilliant suggestions, sadly none of the ideas we received were really as good as this product that's going to be described by Guy Kawasaki.
What makes innovation? First quality of innovation is that the product is deep. Lots of features, does lots of stuff. You have anticipated what people need before they know they need it. They will not run out of power. Great products, great services are deep. This is an example of a deep product. This is a fanning sandal made by Reef. Every sandal in the world has one primary function: protect your feet. This sandal has twice the functionality. That area that's circled, that's a metal clip. The purpose of that metal clip is to open beer bottles. This sandal has twice the functionality and depth of any other sandal in the world.
So we've been really keen to take what we've learned out to the rest of the university. We're working with some different parts of the university on taking advantage of idea management. The university is establishing a new vet school. We accept our first students from this summer. And we're working with the school management team to see how we can use idea management to encourage engagement and foster a sense of community, not only amongst the new staff who are joining the university to run the school, but also by involving key practice partners and having them be involved in decision making about the school. And working with Teaching Enhancement Officer, we're looking at how we could use idea management to complement data from the likes of NSS and iGrad to help define and improve student experience. Now, we've talked a lot amongst ourselves about where else could we make use of this, where can we use idea management. And the most common suggestion that comes up is with the student community at large, either inviting their wants and needs around IT provision, or inviting comment about the entire sort of student experience, which I think is a bold idea but feels like a risky one, which is why we haven't taken it any further for the time being. If you think back to the third step of our Surrey four-step management commitment, we're not just talking about support of the concept here, but we're talking about resourcing. An internal experiment, and we did refer to all of this in IT as an experiment, is one thing. It's quite a small thing. But you can imagine how the management commitment and the requirement for resourcing will scale up to something that covers the whole university. And when you do something like this with students, if the top voted idea doesn't happen, they'll be held to pay, and it'll be harder to engage with students in future. So it's a big decision to make, which isn't to say that we won't do it or that you shouldn't do it. The University of Portsmouth's Shaping Our Future campaign started in March of this year. They make use of idea scale as well as a couple of other methods to gather ideas from staff and students about what the university might look like in future. And Sheffield, my favourite reference university, are also idea scale users. After a successful pilot in the Information Commons, they're looking to roll out more instances of idea scale over the next year. So let's start to wrap this up. I'm afraid this is a slide that might only make sense to parents of small children. If I were to approach this kind of exercise again, or if I were advising someone on how to run this kind of exercise for themselves, what would I say to them? Well, the most important thing to mention is, shout from the rooftops really, is this is an investment. Be prepared to invest time and money in proportion to the size of the program you're running. And have a realistic expectation of the value the program will realise, and accept that the journey itself will have value. Don't underestimate the value of this as a way of forming a sense of community. And if it's important to you to do so, think in advance about how you're going to measure success. It's something we didn't really think about, but as we've been working through the program, we've been of the view that What we want is ideas. So the number of ideas submitted, the number we've been able to move into development and then deliver have been the numbers that we care about. But yours might be about cost savings or engagement or something more specific to a particular project or theme. When you've got an idea of what you hope to achieve in mind, get your process in there. Make sure you've got a well thought out process for how you deal with ideas, how they might be selected, how they might be resourced, and make sure this is well communicated. Having this clear helps with your next point. Make sure that it actually means something. You're asking for your staff's ideas, for their time, possibly above their normal roles. A clear process helps underline that you actually mean something with this, you want it to go somewhere. If you get management commitment, then you're on your way. And if you choose to use an online tool to facilitate this, it's worth pointing out again that Portsmouth, it was only part of what they were doing. Don't worry too much about the tool selection. Excuse me. Things like brainstorming, questionnaires, facilitated discussions, drop-ins, they've all got their place. Be aware of the importance of early adopters. Have people lined up from the start, have them primed to get involved, they give you your early momentum. Next up, sell, sell, sell. If you go to your participants, get them involved. This is the point you start realising value. Have a facilitator. This is the person who takes ideas and helps deliver the process you planned out earlier. Without this role, you've just got people talking about ideas. And if you're going to go big, think about having champions. These are people who own particular themes and campaigns. They're out there talking about them, encouraging people to get involved and soliciting new ideas. Your facilitator also helps maintain tempo, and they do this partly through process delivery, but primarily through communication. If you don't do this, then at best people will forget about it, and at worst it will be dismissed as a waste of time. Plan for gamification from the start. We didn't. It feels like we maybe missed out a trick, but always reward participation. Now, there's one more thing I want to pick up that I haven't picked up in the narrative so far, and that is, while a broad culture of innovation is something that we can all aspire to in our organisations, I'd encourage everyone not to think about idea management as being something that you run all the time. It might be possible to reach a point where that works, where such a scheme sort of it forms part of the day-to-day business, but that's very difficult to maintain that kind of momentum. Instead, think about running campaigns, invitations to contribute ideas around particular topics, themes, projects, campaigns. This gives focus for those who are involved, gives a clear scope for potential ideas, but it also takes away the risk of a programme just quietly dying out, meaning you can bring it back time and again for new themes. But remember, at the end of the day, this is all about people, their ideas and their time. So before I finish, we'll take a look again at our Surrey VIPs. What did they achieve from the 4 months that we really invested into this? We had 51 ideas, 351 votes, and got 295 comments from 92 of the 107 staff we invited to participate. The last staff survey, we got the results a month or so ago. We had a 45% increase in the number of IT staff who thought that we had a culture of open communication in the department. And we've realised 8 ideas, that's nearly 20%, with a further 9 still in development. And while I can't claim credit for the last random idea that we're about to see, inexplicably none of my excellent ideas ever really made it beyond proposal. Thank you very much. I told you I'd be quick.
Yeah, we've got time for questions.
Oh.
So anybody got any questions?
Chris Dixon, Lancaster University. You've successfully scared me there because I have a member of staff starting on Monday in a new unit, and the idea of that unit is to sort of do what you've done but looking at students, which you've already said will be extremely difficult. So thanks for the encouragement there. My question is, one of the main things that we've come across while trying to get this started up is a worry that the ideas that you generate will kind of, after a period of time of being innovative, have to be passed to the rest of the organisation to support, and throwing things over the wall and then supporting them is viewed as a bad idea. Can you maybe say a little bit about if that was a challenge for you and how you got around it?
It's not something that we encountered. Like I say, a lot of the things that we came up with were fairly small. They were more improvements rather than big new things that we then had to look after afterwards. But that was part of the reason why we had the link there into the project management framework. If we knew that this was going to result in something big, then we put it through a proper project, and then how we manage operation once it's developed is taken care of through that. So we didn't encounter it, but we hoped we'd planned for it. I wouldn't say you shouldn't work with this with the entire student community. It's a big investment, and it is a risk. There is a risk associated with it. But if you've got someone kind of dedicated to it, then you're most of the way there. I think you've got someone there who is there to make sure that these things happen and happen in a structured way.
My name is Lorraine Nolan from the University of Huddersfield. You talked about the fact that it's important to maintain tempo. How did you deal with maintaining engagement with the scheme? Say, did you ever encounter people who got lots of ideas and none of them bore any fruit and they took the baton?
Not. Sorry, you have to repeat the last part.
Okay. Did you have any problems with, did you encounter any problems with engagement of staff who perhaps have been prolific contributors and not seen their ideas come to fruition?
We had to, it was part of an earlier draft of the presentation, and I took it out for time reasons. There was a confession in the earlier draft that we used our awards tactically to address that kind of thing. Going back again to the idea about the ITSM tool, obviously this was surfacing actually something that was a hot topic regardless. It wasn't just an idea that someone came up with. When it was clear that this wasn't a way to just railroad that idea through and actually we had to do it, we used the awards in a way to try and mend fences. And so we tried to patch things up that way. You're getting a workout this afternoon, aren't you?
I'm Mickey from the University of Kent. How open were you to people just basically reporting problems that they didn't quite have ideas for, but like your Wi-Fi and lake example, I'm guessing most people were complaining that there's no Wi-Fi around the lake, and so then someone said, why don't we have Wi-Fi around the lake? How strict were you with just saying we only want ideas? Or people can post and then, I suppose you push it with the facilitator idea, but like how open were you or strict were you with ideas versus problems?
We welcomed all ideas. I mean, one of the ideas that was really nothing to do with IT was someone pointing out that it's quite difficult that our Easter break didn't actually match up necessarily with the Easter holidays in schools. Nothing to do with IT, and really it wasn't something that we had Chris primarily as sort of a facilitator for this, but we hadn't thought that would be the kind of thing that came up. So if you're going to go, we should have accounted for it, and we should have had links into the like of HR. The obvious solution to at least feel like we've done something about the idea of having solar panels on roofs would be to have links into estates, to have those kind of connections there so that an idea like that comes in, you can actually do something with it. We were running this as quite a small thing, so we didn't think these things would be necessary at the time. If we were to do it again, it would be something that we'd have there.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
So big thank you to Gareth.